I am an artist living in beautiful Vermont, USA, and I have a lot of questions. So I engage the minds of the people that I meet, poets, writers, artists. I explore what's inside and share it with you. My name is Ricky McGeckran, and I am eager to know. Hey everyone, welcome to Eager to Know, and I am excited to have Greg Martin here as a guest. Greg is a coach, an educator, a musician, all of my favorite things. Welcome to Eager to Know.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So you and I met at open mic night, I believe at Main Street Arts. Open mic night is a open mic in Saxons River, and you were performing acoustic guitar and singing, and it was really incredible.
Yeah, I came down to Main Street Arts to do the open mic night, and then we started talking and got into conversation about education and all sorts of different stuff.
Right. So I was running the other day down my street, and a car pulls up, and it's you. And we're just I pull off my headphones, and we start talking. And you were talking about how you are currently coaching cycling. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is? And I have a lot of questions about coaching.
Okay. So currently I'm coaching the mountain bike team at VA. And we are a team that has some competitive racers on it, some kids that really aspire to do more with that. A lot of kids that are just doing it for fitness and because it's fun, you get to be in the woods in the afternoon. And then another crew of kids that are really passionate about bikes, but they just enjoy like going to the pump track and doing jumps and things like that. And I got into coaching cycling after a lot of years where I was actually racing as a cyclist.
Okay. And you were racing, like road racing?
Yeah, I was racing on the road.
Which is not what you're coaching.
What I'm coaching.
You're coaching something
So I'm
different.
coaching mountain biking, and I was racing on the road, and cyclocross, which is a niche sport created by the Belgians, where it's a crazy sport. Basically, it looks like you're on a road bike, but it has knobby tires, and you basically ride on like a 3-kilometer course. It's going to have like sand and grass, and you have to dismount and run with the bike and stairs. So I started racing mountain bikes back in the 90s, and then I raced on the road from about 99 to about 2009.
Okay.
And then I sort of hung it up and kind of came back into it with some coaching with USA Cycling, USAC. And then when I got to VA, the opportunity to coach mountain biking presented itself, and it was sort of a natural thing.
So tell me about the difference between being obviously you're a natural competitor, I assume, versus being a coach. Like, talk to me about coaching. What's that all about? I mean, the way you described it, you have different kids with different needs. So it sounds like there has to be an assessment on like what someone is looking to do and in pushing them. And
it's really about differentiating. We're all different people. With different skill sets and different limitations and different histories and different backgrounds and different goals. And I think that very much goes hand in hand with education, with the idea that we're not all at the same place at the same time with the same toolbox.
Yeah.
So how do you get people to realize their sort of potential and be passionate about something? And realize the value in just participating. Half of competing is just showing up, right?
Okay.
And just the idea that you can model behaviors and model mindsets for kids.
What does that mean?
Asking them to think deeply about why they're doing something and whether it is it a habit that's transferable? So in other words, tenacity, or the ability to push through, or the ability to literally fall off the bike and get back on and try it again. The parallels with cycling and life are unbelievably similar.
Okay.
Right? Life is a bike race.
Okay.
Where you have hills and you have downhills and you have sprints and you have crashes and you have bad weather. And it kind of really resonates, I think, as you're coaching kids on how you do all these things. Okay. And then on top of it, you have a machine.
Yeah.
So you have to learn how a machine works, and you have to learn how to take care of things and be your own mechanic. And then you learn about nutrition, and then you learn about sleep, and then you learn about hydration.
And everything's related.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Now, would you say that coaching came out of your passion for education? Because it sounds, a lot of what you're talking about, it sounds like the mindset of being an educator. It sounds very closely related.
Yeah, I think if I think back to like when I was a kid, I competed in surfing, I competed in taekwondo, I played football and lacrosse, and I think back to my childhood, and the people that were really influential were my teachers and coaches.
Okay.
And at a boarding school, your teachers happen to be your coaches, and your coaches happen to be your teachers. So I think, I think back to the cast of characters that, were sort of in my life when I was 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And these were people that were academics, they were athletes, they were artists, they were, people that were very much well-versed in pastoral care. And, when I kind of thought about what I want to do with a career, all of that sort of stew came together. And I think those lines are, you're not just one thing, you can be a lot of things.
Okay.
And you don't have to put all your eggs in a single basket and try to aspire to greatness, but you can be well-versed, jack of all trades, master of none sort of mentality. And I think the classroom, coaching, music, piece all sort of comes together.
Okay.
All over the place.
Yeah. So when you grew up in New England, or?
No, I grew up in Stone Harbor, New Jersey.
That's right.
I was a beach kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were into athletics.
Yep.
Very early on, and so you were engaged with coaching. So did I just understand that the people that were involved in coaching were also educators and artists? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, because I went to boarding school in 8th grade.
Okay.
So 8th grade, I went to a school called the Petty School in Hightstown, New Jersey.
Okay.
And big 550-person prep school where everybody played, 2 seasons of sports, and your history teacher was also the hockey coach or the football coach.
Okay, so it's a similar setup.
Yep,
to
similar
where
setup
you are
to where
right
I
now.
am right now. And I think that model, you really get to see adults as people as opposed to just like doing their adult thing over there. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really powerful model to sort of understand that you're not just one-dimensional. People aren't one-dimensional. And being authentic, so like when they see, for example, when we're riding on the trails,
Yeah.
and there's a section that I'm scared to ride because I'm scared to ride a lot of sections as I get older, the kids understand that. And all of a sudden they see you differently, and then they become your coach to coach you through it. So there's this sort of back and forth that goes on, which is really, really neat.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I never heard you talk about winning, that's really interesting.
Right.
Normally when I think about a coach, I think about winning and drive, and I'm not hearing that, which makes me feel I'm not saying that that isn't important, but that's interesting.
I think it's something that, like, growing up, I was unbelievably competitive. And I was not naturally skilled as an athlete or as an academic or as a musician. I just worked harder than most people.
Okay.
And, I've been on teams that have been undefeated. I was a football player, lacrosse player, always. I've coached undefeated teams in football and lacrosse. I've coached defeated teams. And I think as I've gotten older, I think if you're at the pro level, winning matters, right? Because that's kind of why you're there. But I think anything below that, it's about what did you get out of it? Did you put your best in? Can you take lessons from it?
Yeah.
What went wrong?
Yeah.
What went right?
Yeah.
What would you do differently?
Yeah. That competitive nature about you, where do you think that came from? Was that something that is part of who you are, or do you think that's something that was based on, I don't know, how you were brought up or something? Or
I think it's kind of my DNA. It is. But I think over the years, I've softened that edge.
Okay.
I used to be very much like, we're going to win this.
Okay.
We're going to go all in.
Yeah.
And now I'm in my 50s, and it's sort of, you see it a little bit differently, I think, as you get older. That's that kind of the journey. My parents were not competitive in that sense. My dad was an academic, so maybe there's a little bit of that academic piece there, competitiveness. But the athletic thing was just, I found my people. It was my social group. It was my outlet. It was, the escape to get out of home as a teenager. A lot of the identity kind of gets wrapped up in that.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think you go through those transitions in your life, and you hear about this all the time with athletes, right? Where they have this massive pro career. I was watching a podcast last night with Lance Armstrong. and he had on, his guest was Sir Bradley Wiggins, one of the most decorated British track cyclists ever, who then transitioned over to racing on the road, won the Tour de France, and then just sort of fell apart because he retired and he was like, who am I? What's my purpose? What's my value in the world? And I think that happens to a lot of athletes if all they ever focus on is winning. If that's what their driver is. Once that's gone, how do you fill that? How do you fill that?
Right.
So,
good.
Yeah.
Let's talk about music. When did you, when we started this interview, I talked about that was one of the ways that you and I first engaged was you playing guitar. Incredible. And you inspired me. I have this radio show we talked about. And I have to come up with a playlist every week. And you inspired me. One of the songs was that Glenn Campbell.
Oh, Wichita Lineman.
Yeah, that's such a great song. And I've now started listening to it all the time. And but anyhow, so tell me about music. Where did that start for you? I'm assuming it started with listening to music. And then when did it transition into playing? And
I think it was, my parents were both into music, but nothing I was into.
What do you mean by into music? Listening?
Yeah, so my dad listened to a lot of music. He also played the harp. I played the hammered dulcimer and the mountain dulcimer. My mom played the piano. My dad played the piano.
Oh, okay. So,
but I had older parents. My mom didn't have me until she was 43. So I was kind of raised by grandparents. So it wasn't just a single generation gap. It was they're listening to stuff out of World War II. And I'm like, what's this?
Okay. So your parents were 43 when they had you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Only child.
You were an only child?
Yeah. At 43. So I was definitely the ultimate surprise.
Interesting.
And they were into music. My dad was an Episcopal priest. So a lot of it was church related music. But then growing up on the beach in New Jersey, in the 80s.
Yeah.
Part of that whole scene was music.
Right.
So it was a lot of ska, a lot of reggae, a lot of ska, a lot of 80s punk bands Agent Orange and Gangrene and all that. And then I sort of got into a whole other genre through reggae and started listening to the Grateful Dead and all those other bands, Allman Brothers. And then I got to, it was before I went to high school, before I went to Petty, so probably 7th grade, I got a guitar. And the Mel Bay Book of Chords, which was this encyclopedia of 800 ways to play an E.
Okay.
And just started messing around with that. And then in high school, played and got in, high school bands and that sort of business. And
did you dedicate a lot of time to guitar?
It was interesting because I was doing the athlete thing.
Yeah.
So it was really in the evening or on weekends where I play guitar.
But you were consistently doing it?
Consistently playing, yeah.
Okay, because that's a lot of kids. Obviously love music and they want to learn guitar.
Right,
a lot of them get a guitar and then they start it and then they don't. They're not consistent. And obviously to play an instrument you have to be consistent with it.
Yeah, I found I hated music theory.
Oh, I love music theory.
It just bored me.
I think it's so interesting. I think
mean now, but again, this whole circle thing where you go with that rhythm and that path. Now I think about it, it's really interesting. But as a 13-year-old, I was I just wanted to learn how to play whatever song.
See, I think as a 13-year-old, I still would have think it's because of how my brain works. I have to know how everything works behind the curtain.
Right.
And when I started taking piano lessons, and I thought it was okay. I'm learning how to play notes, blah blah blah.
Right.
But then when I started to learn about the system of how it works, I thought that was the most fascinating thing, and I think I probably would have thought it was interesting at 13. But anyhow,
I've always been how's it work? I want to figure it out and tinker with it to see how it works. Don't tell me how it works. Let me figure it out. And that was definitely kind of the route I went.
Okay.
I think I took a couple guitar lessons at some point.
Right.
But then I never learned how to read music.
Interesting.
Can't read a note. My wife makes fun of me. She's like, "How can you not read music?" I'm like, "It doesn't mean anything to me."
You certainly play great.
I look at the sheet and I'm like, "It doesn't say anything."
Yeah.
And then so through high school, played a lot of guitar. Always had a guitar in the back of my Jeep growing up, and then did some plays in high school. Interestingly enough, I did
acting.
Yeah, I did Oklahoma. I was Old Man Carnes, and then I did Guys and Dolls. But at that time, it was you basically had to either be a theater person or an athlete.
I've heard that is a thing.
And just couldn't do both.
Yeah.
So I decided to go with the athletic piece,
Right.
but I kept the music piece.
Okay.
And then, started singing a little bit more, and then got into college and just started playing in lots of different bands, and found out I was a useful rhythm guitar player.
Okay.
And could sing well enough.
Yeah, you have a great voice.
And
is your voice, I'm curious, is that something that, because I don't sing, is that something you have to work on, like playing guitar, or is it something that
Oh,
just
yeah,
comes?
you definitely have to work on it.
Okay.
I mean, which I never really have. Like,
Right.
I never took voice lessons or anything, so I
Yeah.
probably do everything wrong. But so I didn't play. It was January 24, I think, was that Main Street Arts open mic,
Okay.
the first one I played. January, February, something like that. I hadn't played a gig in 20 years.
So were you nervous?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I hadn't, my guitar, I pulled it out of its case after 20
That's
years.
right. I remember you telling me that, because I remember we
Right.
were.
Right.
I heard someone practicing in the art room, and it was
Downstairs,
you.
yeah,
you were
yeah.
downstairs practicing,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
and you were warming up, and you told me that you
Yep.
had not.
Yep.
I forgot about that.
There was a set list in the case from 2003,
That's so
which was
great.
crazy. And that guitar was a gift from my dad when I graduated from high school.
Yeah.
And it's actually, sadly, it's unplayable. Like, I took it to a luthier
Yeah.
down in Brattleboro and said, "Hey, can you fix this?" And he's like,
Yeah.
"Can't do it. So I need to get a new guitar." But so, I played a lot when I was in college.
Right.
I played in bands on the Vineyard. I played all sorts of stuff. And then I sort of got tired of it because it became kind of a job.
Yeah.
And it wasn't fun anymore.
Right.
So, I kind of stepped back from that and, taught my stepsons to play guitar when they were kids. But aside from that, really didn't touch anything. And vocally, it's interesting because, your range changes as you get older.
Okay.
And just like a muscle, if you don't exercise your voice, your range really shrinks. So that's been kind of interesting. I've learned more about how to cultivate that and take care of it. And I'm watching a lot of different singers. I have this list of singers that I pay attention to. Chris Cornell from Soundgarden, Marcus King, who's one of my favorites, but Otis Redding, and I mean the Teskey brothers, and just this whole crew of people that are phenomenal singers. And then it just kind of came back to me this year, and a couple students were noodling on the guitar, and I'd come down and play. And they didn't know I played.
Right.
And then one of my seniors, she was doing an independent study to create an EP. So she was working with our director of music, Steve Cady, and she was like, "Hey, do you want to play on my album?" And I was like, "Sure." So I had to start playing again because I needed to.
So do you have a credit on the album?
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm on there. I think it's just self-produced. I don't know where it is right now. But, and then the Main Street Arts thing popped up, and she and I played together.
Oh, yeah.
We did a duet.
I
We did
remember that.
Angel from Montgomery,
Right.
Bonnie Raitt, and then we did, I think I accompanied her on Valerie by Amy Winehouse.
Yes, I was there for that.
Yeah.
How does music relate to the conversation that we had earlier about education, coaching? Like those,
Yeah.
you really pulled those education and coaching together really tightly. Is music and learning music and developing, does that relate to any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the idea of genres, right? So how things change and progress, and how you could take little bits and pieces from different musical styles or different artists or different time periods and be able to sort of draw off them.
Okay.
And it's the same thing really with athletics, where you think back to different sports you have done
Okay.
versus what you're doing now versus
Okay.
what you want to do in the future. And you look at different athletes and different types of athletes and grab little pieces from them.
Okay.
Like, what were they known for? What were they really good at? What's the story behind them?
Okay.
And it's kind of the same thing with music. And then how do you impart that enthusiasm, that love of something to other people,
Okay.
right? So whether it's music or art or, I don't know, the study of history or bicycling or whatever.
How do you do that? How do you get kids excited and passionate? I mean, I know I had teachers that did it for
Yeah.
me, but for me, it was usually about it was
Right.
the topic.
Right.
Like I remember
Right.
when I first learned about physics I'm such a nerd, but like when I learned about physics and I realized that all of this stuff, like math wasn't created just to annoy us.
Right.
It was
Has a
actually
point.
describes our world. I
Right.
could not believe that.
Yeah.
And that was so motivating
Yep.
to me, but it wasn't necessarily the teacher.
I mean, I think when you're into something, like that enthusiasm can be infectious.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right. And whether it's, an athletic endeavor or music or a subject that I think people pick up when you are authentically engaged and
Of
care
course,
about
yeah.
something. And I think that passion can be transferable because I think the more you show that you're interested in something and the more that you can connect things to real life,
Yeah.
right? I mean, what can everyone relate to? Music
Yeah.
of some kind.
Yeah.
There's nobody in the world that doesn't listen to some kind of music, right? Food, right? We can all talk about food. We all have our favorite foodie things, right? Everybody has been competitive in something, or everybody has some kind of thing they like to engage in. So how do you have conversations that can kind of like cross those lines, where you can talk to somebody about music or about a sport that might not be yours, but there's a commonality there. So, when you talk to somebody who's not a cyclist about cycling, how do you get them to understand that it's much like something they're doing, or even music?
What about something though like calculus, for instance? Like if you have, I mean, I don't know exactly what the curriculum is at VA, but
Right.
I mean, I'm assuming there are kids that are taking calculus that aren't particularly thrilled about it.
Right.
How does,
Right.
I'm just curious how do you get them excited about something, or can you?
I think it comes down to, and that's where it's not the subject, it's the person teaching it. I mean, I think about how many college professors are just garbage teachers, right? Like, great, you've got a Pulitzer Prize and, you give big lectures at the UN, but can you teach a class of ninth graders? No way, right? So that's where it's not about the topic, it's about the person. And how do you get people interested in and sort of like hook people in? So no matter where they are, there's something they can grab onto and be like, oh, I get that, or I see that, or that reminds me of. And as soon as you get that reminds me of, that's where you have the connection with people.
So it sounds like a lot of it is observation and connecting with the students at an individual level,
Right.
to find out where they are.
Where they are. You meet them where they are, you get them to where they can be.
Okay.
It's the same thing with coaching. Not everybody is going to be a world-class athlete,
Okay.
right? It's just not going to happen.
Right.
But, everybody can understand what it takes to get from point A to point B, to progress, to get better, to grow, to fail, right? You have to fail. You always have to fail. I think that's an important part of learning of anything, whether it's, how to kick a soccer ball, or how to drop in on a wave, or how to do a handstand, or how to play a song, or how to take a calculus test, which gives me PTSD, but...
And you got to get up and
resilience
and keep going.
Yeah, resilience. The day keeps going. Everything keeps going, regardless of where you are.
Yeah.
And how do you manage that? And how do you sort of get through that? And how do you find the positives and the good and the lesson, even in a bad day?
I think this is so interesting because you highlighted cycling as a metaphor for life, and that you fall down, etc.
Right.
But I feel like you can find that in so many things, because I remember when I first started taking yoga,
Right.
I feel like this is the metaphor for life,
Right.
because it's about staying focused, even how regardless of
Right.
how painful it is,
Right.
or don't pay attention to what others in the class are doing. You got to try to do the best you can.
Right.
And then when I started taking
Right.
piano, I'm like, okay, now this is the metaphor for life, because it's about staying focused and how you you get a
Yeah.
piece, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
impossible. I'll never be able to do this, and with persistence you can.
Yep.
So I feel like all of
Yeah.
these metaphors and these opportunities to learn are really everywhere if you're just looking at it in the right way.
Yeah, if you break it down, it's like, what are those pieces, right? Identifying a challenge and figuring out how to get through the challenge, and iterating and seeing other people struggle,
Yep.
and going, oh, I'm not the only person that's having trouble with that. But then you see somebody make the breakthrough, like they play that piece, or they're able to clear the hurdle, if we're just thinking about the Olympics right now.
Yeah.
And that can be very motivating, right? And then you have these time periods where maybe it's not going so well, and then something clicks and it gets better. that you have to stretch yourself, that you have to challenge yourself, that you have to go back and look at it and be like, okay, why didn't that go the way I hoped it would, right? What would I do differently? And then you take it from a different angle. Right?
What would you say is, based on all of your experience with yourself, with working with other kids, with other people, what would you say is the biggest, I'm trying to think of the right word to use here, the biggest problem that people have that causes them to not move forward? Is it like quitting? What would you say it is?
It's definitely fear.
Fear.
I mean, because everybody's afraid of, like, the biggest fear is loss, right? Everybody's afraid of loss. And it doesn't just mean like losing something. It means you fear giving 100% because you fear the judgment that you might get if it doesn't go well.
Because then you're on the hook.
You're on the hook for it, right? Or you fear change because you're comfortable in whatever situation it is, and the unknown is what is fearful. You're fearful of. You fear being, judged. You fear having to admit to yourself that maybe I've hit my limit. You fear putting in time and loss of time. Right? If I put all this time into this thing and it doesn't turn out the way I'm hoping it will, then it's a failure. So a lot of it comes back to fear of failure.
So would you say the biggest issue is people being stopped by fear?
Yeah.
Being stopped by fear.
Being stopped by fear, and I think a lot of that is because people keep comparing themselves to each other, which is a natural thing, right? Like we always.
But isn't that what
ourselves.
competition is about, though? Is it or isn't it?
Is it intrinsic or is it extrinsic, right?
Okay.
Like what's your motivation? Do you have to be motivated by the outside thing, or are you motivated by an inside thing?
Okay.
Right. And I think once you figure out how to have that intrinsic motivation, where it's not about the external, it's about you and wanting to do X, Y, or Z, then it becomes a different game. If you're always motivated by, the sticker, then why are you doing it? Mm-hmm. Right? Like what's the point? And I think there's times for that.
Okay.
Right? There's times for, I'm doing this for an external motivator. Mm-hmm. But I think if you're really going to get into something and really be successful at something, it has to be an internal driver. It has to be an internal driver. Like kids that are on teams and striving to like make the next club or make the cut or whatever for their parents generally are going to flame out in athletics. Because it's not really them driving it, it's something external driving it.
Greg, this was a great conversation.
It's fun, a lot of fun.
And it went into places that I am so excited it went to, and I actually learned a lot from it and a lot from talking to you today.
It's funny as you talk through things that like you begin thinking about it differently as well, because a lot of these connections I haven't really thought of in that way, but as you ask some questions and I answer, and I'm like, oh, I didn't notice it from that angle. So I really appreciate the time and having me on. Yeah,
no problem. That's why I do this podcast. Yeah. I mean, I've learned so much from talking to people about, talking to all these different people about so many different topics. Yep. And I learned so much, and I can actually see, my viewpoints on things change. Yeah. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
My name is Ricky McGuckran, and you have been listening to Eager to Know, the podcast. If you haven't already, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join me next week for another Eager to Know podcast.